Welcome to What Drives You. I'm Kevin Miller. In this episode, what comprises a good life? I mean, talking about a good life feels like speaking to success. Well, what does that make up? And we generally say that you got to define that for yourself, and which I agree with overall. However, my guest in this show, he's been studying a good life for a long, long time, many years, and he really found that it boils down to three buckets. Three categories, if you will. It's Jonathan Fields. He's actually become known as the Good Life Guy. He's got a really popular podcast called The Good Life Project. I've had Jonathan on the show twice at least, and I often reference a profile that he created called Spark Type. If you go to it, it's SPARKETYPE, sparktype.com. And it's a free profile, if you will, to see what sparks you in your work. I've really found it beneficial. This conversation you're about to hear happened years ago when I sat down with Jonathan just to dig into what he has found makes up a good life. He had at the time written a book called The Good Life Project, sold a lot, really put him on the map, I think. And of course, that's what his show is called, The Good Life Project. But as you're about to hear, I also dug into Jonathan himself and what got him to this point of pursuing and embracing this movement on a good life and becoming the leader that he has become to so many people who want to understand how to pursue this good life. I found the conversation incredibly intriguing. I think you will too. And it'll give you a lot to think about in regards to how you are living, loving, and leading. And when I'm not having these conversations about human potential, I'm working with people on theirs and be honored to talk with you. See if I can help you or I can give you a resource that can. You can connect with me at kevinmiller.co. Here are a few sponsors. They help make the show possible. Then drive with me as I talk with Jonathan Fields, and we talk about what comprises a good life. And let's see what we can learn for ourselves today. Well, Jonathan, it is, I'm the host. I'm supposed to say it's an honor. Man, it truly is. I just have been really digging into your stuff and such a kindred spirit in your quest. I'm just a fan, and you've inspired me. And I want to look at this. I mean, the good life, and you talk about that right off in the book and in your message. Man, what a huge issue, and it encompasses so many aspects. And I'm wondering that today, your day-to-day life, as you work with people, as you go to the coffee shop, as you're just in social groups, what is the initial thought that comes to mind when you're thinking about this good life and people who have a good life, or you can see them suffering from it? What's the main ingredient that tends to stick in your mind the most? And I ask that with a bias, that I tend to look at health and wellness. I don't know why that comes to me first. There's so many things, but what's the ingredient that tends to haunt your mind the most with people?
Yeah, I think that ingredient well, first, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the kind words. When I think about that ingredient, the thing that I think pops into people's minds first and foremost is very often health, and it's that old saying, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything.
Yeah.
And that's certainly true. Although what I have found, I'm 52. I'm into the middle years of my life, and I'm at an age where I have a lot of friends who either live with some level of disability or chronic pain, or they've been through some severe illness, they've been through loss, and health absolutely matters. But what I found is that as you get a bit further into life, health is really important. But there comes a time also where sort of like um, you start to realize that the depth of your relationships are the thing that really sustains you as you move through whatever life throws at you. Um, so, if we don't have the vessel that contains us as we move through life to be healthy, to be as optimized as we can get it to be, then we don't have anything. Once we have that, the thing that really is the difference maker is relationships. It's the
Mhm.
depth of your relationships. If you think about the Grant Study for Men, which is the longest running study on human flourishing. And granted, yes, it was done all on males, which it would be awesome to have a bigger data set, that included everybody, males, females, fluid gender, whatever we can fold into that. But the longest curator of that study, George Valiant, was asked, when you have looked at literally every variable that's occurred in people's lives over a span of 90 years. And these included everyone from former presidents to people who lived very hand to mouth in the neighborhood. Was there a single unifying factor that was the big difference maker? And his answer was happiness is love, full stop. It's all about relationships. It's about the depth and quality of relationships. And I have come to believe that, while vitality, relationships, and sense of purposeful contribution are all critical, my focus increasingly is really on it's on love, it's on relationships.
Okay, so and I want to come back to that now with my admitted focus that I often have on health and wellness. So I'm just curious on your take on this because I keep looking at it and I always bristle being, I mean, I grew up in the personal development world and I still am today. And I bristle when, whoever's thing is their only thing, just like we have in health and wellness, this pill, this herb,
Yeah.
this oil, this whatever is the thing. And no, it's not. Maybe one of them, but in this, with health and wellness, I don't want to be that guy who's saying, oh, it's the thing. I do struggle with it being, maybe it's just a sequentially the thing, because if you don't, just like you said, if your vessel is compromised, then it is harder to have those. If we put relationships as the holy grail in a sense, it makes it harder. So is that, do you fall in line with that?
Yeah. So let's let's zoom the lens out a little bit,
Yeah.
right? So my model of a good life is essentially we all have three buckets. We have vitality, connection, and contribution.
Yeah.
A good life is when you optimize your vitality, which is your state of mind, your state of body. When you cultivate deep and meaningful relationships, and when you have purposeful contribution. Most people equate that with work, whether it's the thing you get paid for or not. So the point you just brought up is really important in this context because those three buckets do not exist in isolation from each other.
Mm-hmm.
There's a constant feedback mechanism between the two. So if you talk to me about relationships, one of the things that I'll tell you is that the state of your personal relationships will have a very real and measurable effect on both your state of body and your state of
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah.
The state, and like you just said, your state of physical well-being, your state of mental well-being. You can hear the siren in the
I got
background.
it. Hey, it's New
Proof
York.
that it's
It's
New
New
York
York.
City right now.
Absolutely.
Um, so your state of physical and mental well-being and health are also going to definitely feed back into your ability to develop and cultivate meaningful relationships. And those two things are also going to feed back into your ability to understand what matters to you and then purposefully contribute to the world in a way that is really aligned. So there is no there, there's in my mind, it's kind of like the old split that people used to talk about. Well, there's your body and there's your mind, as if there were two different things, which we now know. I mean, now through tons of science, to actually distinguish between those two is just complete fiction. The feedback between those systems is so close and so tight that there is no real distinction between them. And so when we talk about your health and your relationships and meaningful contribution, to me, you can kind of name those as the big buckets, but you're 100% right. It, there's no way to isolate them. One feeds back into the other, which feedbacks into the other. And it's sort of like this either virtuous or destructive cycle.
Do you see that? I mean, I hear you saying, okay, we know better than to think the body mind connection, or that it's not connected, that it's separate. So we know that, but I'm unfortunately think that we may still be small. I mean, don't you see it? I mean, again, being in the personal
Yeah.
development world and the influencing world and with the authors and presenters and speakers and the leaders of our time, that we still see that. I think less. I think people are getting more and more into that, but we still can have this tendency to think that our body can, go to hell in a handbasket in some sense, or at least be compromised a little bit. But oh man, we can think, and yet we see the results of that. It doesn't last.
Yeah, well, so there are two ideas bundled in that.
Yeah.
One is actually buying into the reality, into the truth that these are two tightly interwoven systems, and you can't separate them. The other is even if you do agree with that, then actually behaving in the world in a way that acknowledges that truth. Like so, most of us would be like, "Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'll buy into that. I see all the signs. Makes perfect sense to me." And then we go out and we eat horribly and we work
Right.
insane hours and we never pit stop to refuel and we don't, self care is non existent in our lives. And, if you look at the average person who has gone through cardiac incident,
Hmm.
and whether they have surgery or whatever it may be, and then they go into cardiac rehab, which has a number of stages to rehab. What you find is a very high level of compliance in stage one.
Hmm.
By the time somebody actually completes all stages, if they complete it, and then they go out back into their lives, and a year down the road, if you look at the lifestyle behavior of many of those people, a year or 2 years down the road, it's reverted substantially back to the same behavior that was a significant contribution to the original incident. Because the further they get from the pain
Hmm.
of the incident, the less of a daily reminder they have of the importance of certain behaviors in the world, and they just kind of start to they they want the marshmallow and they want the whatever it may be, and they want to be sedentary and they want to do the other things because they're not feeling it on a day-to-day basis anymore. And compliance, whether you are a physician wanting somebody to take life-sustaining medication, whether you're a trainer wanting somebody to exercise 4 to 5 days a week, whether you're a nutritionist wanting somebody to eat more whole foods and vegetables, compliance is the single biggest nut that, to my mind, very few people have cracked. How do you actually make that happen?
Oh yeah, we're gonna have to talk offline on that one. So you know what?
Okay.
No, no, I'll divulge. I just got out of a meeting with a nutritional supplement company, one that we really like, and we talked about that. And we're looking at on a big scale as we offer a national product that'll be coming up soon on nutritional supplements. So here it is. Here's the price, MSRP, and giving a discount if they will sign up for an automatic shipment and automatic purchase. Now, obviously, does that mean that we all, on the selling end make more money? Yeah. But if I make zero, I need this. I need it. If it does not get shipped to my door, I run out. I don't take them. My compliance goes down. So does my health. Behavioral
Right.
economics.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, that's why if you look at your average gym, your average health club, right? The vast majority of people sign up and never go after the first 6 weeks. And in fact, the entire model is based on the assumption that something between 80%, 80 to 90% of your paying customers will not attend on a regular basis. If they did, you would immediately close down because
Absolutely.
you don't have the capacity to actually serve your existing customers. But they also won't cancel their memberships until very often months after you've stopped attending, because that means that you actually have to proactively say, no, I'm sort of, I'm opting out of this positive behavior that I've
Yeah.
already like automatically opted into.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing with what you're just talking about is if you set somebody up on a subscription model where they have to proactively opt out of a particular behavior, it definitely reinforces a behavior. But at the same time, what you'll find is even on that model, very often, if the behavior that you're looking for is anything beyond a really simple action, even then, even if it's being shipped to somebody's door, even if it's automatically taken out of somebody's bank account, they still won't do it because there's a lot more that has to be in place. It's kind of interesting. The last 2 years on our podcast, the opening podcast of the year, I've sort of devoted to something I call my 7P success scaffolding. And it's the idea that having a plan of action is not enough. That there are environmental changes that you need to make, there are behavioral changes, there are sort of ritualistic and routine changes you need to make in order to create scaffolding to um, to support action taking. And most people do one thing, which is they have some kind of plan, right? But there's a plan won't get you there. And most plans that people adopt also, the moment that they actually interact with the reality of the person's life, they fall apart because they're not a plan which is built upon the reality of a person's day-to-day life. So if somebody is like, well, I'm going to eat entirely only whole foods, 3 meals a day, and never snack, and I work out 5 days a week. I'm going to do this. And then you're talking about somebody who's on the road all the time. You're talking about somebody who lives in isolation. You're talking about,
Yeah.
it's so unrealistic that, aspirationally on paper, it looks great. But the minute it hits, reality, it's completely useless. It's the same thing with entrepreneurs who are looking to start a company and they have great pro formas and great cash flow statements and great projections, and they have like the formulas are dialed in, but it's the garbage in, garbage out thing. If the fundamental assumptions that go into that are wrong, everything that flows from that is wrong. It's the same thing. If you don't have the fundamental scaffolding for healthy behavior, nothing else matters either. You won't sustain the behavior.
Okay, well, and I saw a little bit about the scaffolding and didn't dig into that part. Explain it, because to me it sounds like you are saying, in essence, we have a plan. Now we need a plan for our plan.
No, what you need is something beyond a plan. A
Okay.
plan won't get you there.
Okay.
First, you have to like have a plan that is realistic, a plan that is progressive and adaptable, a plan that is actually dynamic and works within both the constraints and the opportunities of your unique lifestyle situation. It's not, just sort of a stock out of a book. This is the one plan that fits all, which is why I'm a huge opponent of turnkey universal systems, and I'm a huge proponent of frameworks, because if a framework is essentially a decision-making model which shows you how to make intelligent decisions in the context of your own personal life circumstance. Um, Rather than saying this is a system, this is a turnkey system, like everybody just go do it, which never works. 2-3% of the people where that system just happens to organically fit who they are and the way they live, and they get astonishing results, and they become the testimonials for that system. And then everyone's like, oh wow, like it must work. But the reality is they're the extreme outliers,
Right.
and then everybody feels shame and blame when they try that same system and they fail miserably because it is not the system which is appropriate for them. It's not a framework which allows them to say, okay, I understand what's important. I understand what's important to me. I understand how to interact with the world in a way where I can say yes and no to the things that matter in a way that is sustainable in my life.
Okay, you're barking up my tree. I love that. I love the framework. I mean, in the so in this wellness world, and functional medicine is the focal point of a lot of what we do here. And we literally talk. We've been kind of not beating our heads, but we struggle with that, because we know, there's no global system that's going to work for everybody. And in this arena, it's personalized, medicine, personalized healthcare is the only way. So in this, as you're talking about the Good Life Project, I didn't read that word in your book, but I see it as it's a framework, and you don't get all detailed down, and you don't have the 15 steps. You have 3 buckets. Put into that bucket what works for you. That then is your Good Life framework. Yes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's a really simple, highly adaptable model. I'm a huge fan of practical in the world tools and solutions. And I'm also a huge fan of simplicity.
Yeah.
So, one of the other things that I've seen, I'm sure you've seen this in your practice, right, in the functional medicine side of things, is the minute people's eyes glaze over, you've
You're
lost.
gone. Yeah.
It doesn't matter how right you are, it doesn't matter how much science is behind what you're saying. If people can't just immediately understand what you're saying and understand how to implement it in their own lives, it just doesn't matter. I had the chance. I don't know if you've spoken before with Terry Walls on the podcast at all.
Mm-mm.
She's the physician and a researcher who was diagnosed with progressive MS a chunk of years back, and it was progressing very quickly. And she was and ended up very quickly rounding in a automated sort of I forgot what they call them, an electric chair basically that sort of like let her go around the hospital. And she largely reversed all the symptomology of her MS by nutrition, by treating food as medicine.
You know what? My partner was just at an Institute for Functional Medicine gathering, or it was last year, maybe the fall or something. She was there. She talked, went through the story. He related it to me. I thought the name sounded familiar. Unbelievable story.
Yeah, super cool.
Oh,
And I bring it up not even because of that point. I bring it up because when I was speaking with her, she said something that really has stayed with me. That's really like spot on for the conversation we're having right now, which is she said, "I view my job as a physician to so that when a patient leaves my office, like I have them repeat back to me a clear understanding of everything that we just talked about and exactly what they need to do. And if they
wow.
can't say it back to me in simple terms, then I, as a physician, have not done my job." Which is, and I said to her, I said, that's really interesting. I said, is that the standard sort of like course of dealing in the industry? And she almost started laughing. She's like, sadly, no. She's like, for my patients,
Mm-hmm.
yes. Like, you won't leave my office until you get it. Um, And I
Wow.
sometimes think that all, and look, I'm raising my hand too. Like, we all have egos. We all like to present ourselves as if we know something in the world, right? But I think sometimes that gets in the way of just being really simple and valuable, and saying, let me distill this idea down to its simplest form to make it as so that you can hear it once, remember it for life, and then act on it on a daily basis. So that is my goal when I put things into the world. So when we talk about the framework of the good life buckets, it's something you hear it once. Like, you will all remember, like connection, contribution, vitality, three buckets. A good life is basically doing a little bit of something every day to fill each one of those three buckets. If any of them run dry, your life runs dry, right? You can wake up in the morning and think, let me do a quick bucket scan, right? Vitality is feeling maybe a 6 out of 10 today. I haven't slept all that well. I'm feeling kind of tired, maybe a little sick. Connection bucket, you know what? I haven't really spent a whole lot of time with my partner or been in touch with good friends. I'm going to call that a 5. Contribution bucket, I've actually been working like crazy and I love what I'm doing. I'm going to call that an 8 or 9. So, really quickly, in the first 30 seconds of your day, you've just had a diagnostic experience which lets you figure out, what does it make sense for maybe me to give a little bit of love to as I move through this day?
Well, so in that, in looking at you being in this, and I'm gonna call it the personal development, world, the self help world, which is where we are here, which is where our entire podcast demographic, is, whether they're listening to your show or the Ziegler show or Tim Ferriss or whatever. They're people who are aspiring. They do want more. They do want to progress, and yet I'm sure you're as aware as I am or more that we are also in this industry where we take in knowledge, we take in. We're not always seeing the needle move in people's lives, which brings me to what you're doing, because it's amazing. I looked at your show yesterday, Jonathan, and you were sitting at, I think, number 60 uh, overall podcast overall. And folks, if you're hearing that and don't realize how significant that is, that's significant. It's a really big deal. And amongst so many peers with such good messages, what do you, as you look back now amidst this Good Life project, what do you attribute some of it to? That did you expect it? What did you not expect? But is some of it to that degree that you made it simple so that people can remember it, they can engage? Well, I'll let you answer it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I'm constantly trying to deconstruct that very thing and figure it out. Because as somebody who is both a maker and a creator, but also a teacher, I'm always trying to figure out what's luck, what's reproducible, what's
Yeah.
teachable, and probably a couple things come to mind. I think to a certain extent, fortune favors endurance.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is, yes, if you look at where we're sitting today, we're number 60 overall in the world out of like 400,000 or 500,000 podcasts. Sweet, right? But then if you take a look back, what you'll see is that we actually started in 2012. We've
Hmm.
been producing consistently on a weekly basis for like going on 6 years now, where probably 99% of the field that started producing media with me then is gone.
Yeah.
There was no sort of commitment to long-term growth, to long-term sustained improvement, to long-term value provision, and also to the development of craft, which
Hmm.
there is no way to really, you know, accelerate that dramatically. It takes an investment of time. It takes the endurance to say, okay, I'm starting out now. I own the fact that I suck, you know, because we all do in the beginning.
Yeah.
That's where you have to be, beginner's mind. And I'm own the fact that, if I stay with this over a period of months and years, I'm going to get a little bit better. And as I get better, hopefully I'll get better at the craft of what I'm doing. I'll get wiser at the knowledge side of what I'm doing. And, the people who some way resonate with that will stick with me and the audience will slowly build over time. And, I think that that's been one of the things that has really sustained. So I take a very long term perspective. And I think part of that also may come from the fact that My background is not in the online world. My background is in brick and mortar entrepreneurship, where you've got serious stakes, you got serious investment, and even if you succeed, it's very likely that you won't recoup your investment for years, not days or minutes or months. So you have to be in it for long term. You have to be looking at the long term growth and be willing to invest in effort over long term. So I think, when I say fortune favors endurance, that's what I mean. That you've got to have a commitment. And then the bigger thing was, well, what keeps you in the game? What keeps you working when you just wake up at times you're like, oh wow, like I thought, we're producing amazing stuff and nobody's responding, and I'm really bummed, and everybody else is bailing, doing something else, um, and I think it's a blend of feeling a strong sense of purpose, a strong sense of flow, and a strong sense of expression. And I call that state being sparked, right? It's the overlap of being on purpose, deep in flow, and fully expressed. That I feel this sense of I'm doing what I'm here to do. I feel the sense that while I work, I have strong windows of time where I get lost in time because this is play to me. I have become the thing that I want to do, and I would pay to do this. And the expression side is really, it's the expression of knowledge, it's the expression of interest, and it's the expression of identity and craft. And I think when the more you can keep adjusting your work with those things, the more aligned who you are in the world and what you do becomes with those things. You enjoy it on a level where even if you get knocked around, you'll sustain, you'll endure long enough. And at the same time, that sense of alignment creates a coherence or a resonance that
Mhm.
people perceive. That's been my experience over time. Um, but again, it's every once in a while you see somebody hit that really, really quickly. They just get lucky. They dialed it in out of the gate. My experience has been the vast majority of people that I know that find her to come close to it, move in and out of it because I don't think it's a long term sustainable thing. You kind of oscillate in and out
Yeah.
of it. It's it's a long game. I know I just dropped a lot of different things there. So
No, I know. I love it. I want to come back to again, looking at how to live a good life. And I've been digging into it. I love it. It's brilliant, folks. That's why we've got Jonathan on here. Go get the book and dig into it. Get the book, get the journal. It is significant, one, but I think as much as the content is, it's the way that you deliver it. And I was enamored with your show. You have on great guests. You're a great interview, but I want to ask that we have so many people in our audience who are podcasters and they are bloggers, but especially let's look at the podcast side of it, as we know that the information is only as good as the degree to which we can get people to engage, digest, comply, as you talked about a little bit ago. So as you look at this with your show, being where you are, ranked as high as you are, obviously you have found some secret sauce that may not be a secret, because I'm going to ask you about it. With that, as you've looked at it and go, how can I get people to digest? How have you mentioned your craft, developing your craft in this message delivery that you're doing primarily on the podcast. What have you altered since you started? Some of the primary ingredients so that us, the listeners, that we will listen a little longer, listen a little deeper, take a little more action, and listen to the next show.
yeah. So hopefully I suck less than I did when I started.
Obviously, testimony is yes.
um, but yeah, and again, these are questions that I've been sort of diving into myself because I'm curious, and I think part of it is that I'm thousands and thousands of hours into this, and I still really try and revert to beginner's mind. But when you talk about craft, you talk about so the format of our podcast, which we've actually experimented with a bunch over time, but currently every week we produce a long form, about a 60-minute conversation, and then we produce a short form segmented show where it's just me talking about topics of interest, very often sharing research because I'm a complete geek around science. So providing value, genuine value, is sort of like it's the price of entry. You have to be doing that on some level. But what I've realized over time is that you can do that by giving information, And that's what the vast majority of people try and do. But there's another way to provide value that I think a lot of people overlook in the podcast space. And that's where I feel I've awakened to it and I've gotten a lot better at standing in that place. And that is letting people know they're not alone.
Mm.
Um, Simply knowing, so I don't have to have, I don't have to do a 15-minute riff on a particular topic and say, like, this is the answer to everything. I'm going to give you the 7 tips to make it all happen. It may be good enough for me to say, you know what? I had this experience the other day and I couldn't shake it. It really bothered me. And I meditate every day and I do this and I do that. And it stayed with me and it's bothering me now in this moment when I'm talking to you. And I don't know what to do about it. And here are some of the way that I'm trying to think about it. Here's how I'm processing it. Here's one thing that maybe I've figured out that's kind of helping me. So let me offer that out to you. And I'd love to hear what you have to say too. It's a very different thing.
Mm-hmm.
What that requires is understanding that the value is not just in information and solutions. The value can also be in creating an experience that lets people know you are not alone. There's huge, huge value, especially in a day and age where so many people feel isolated, um, oppressed, and disenfranchised.
Wow.
That alone has huge value. The other part of it is I've devoted a lot of energy to the craft of interviewing, and I don't consider myself an interviewer. I consider myself we produce conversations, not interviews. And every once in a while, we'll get a comment on the podcast where somebody's like, "Love the guest. I wish the host would shut up." and and so I'm very clear. I'm like, this is not a traditional interview. This is two people who were sitting next to each other at a friend's dinner party who just start talking, and there's something interesting that they want to have a conversation about. So it is much more free flowing conversation. But I've gotten much better at cultivating what I call exquisite attention, a sense of safety and hyper focused awareness, so that it feels like it is a very nourishing place that there's nowhere else that exists in the world during the conversation. Um, I feel like I've gotten better at being present and listening and observing while we're sort of in that container. And also, I have very likely actually, I know I have because I'm pushing myself to get bolder about asking the questions that I really want to ask, but would be uncomfortable for me to ask and potentially uncomfortable for somebody to answer.
Yeah.
And I've also gotten, I explore different, like very sort of granular techniques. Like, for example, if you ask somebody a question and then they give you an answer, and then you just count to yourself 3, 2, 1. That 3 seconds of silence is so absurdly uncomfortable for the average human being that we will feel the need to fill that space with something, anything. And when you fill the space, that's the time where the ideas, the wisdom, the vulnerability, the self expression that was not sort of prepared and planned, that's when that emerges. And that very often is when the conversation gets real. When you go off script and you create mechanisms and invitations for the people that you're in conversation with to go off script as well.
Okay, that's really curious. I'm sitting here trying to be bright enough to put these pieces together, and I don't know that I can do it on the fly like this. But from a sales standpoint, and Ziegler, is big on sales. We just did a big event with Secrets of Closing the Sale. It's on sales, but of course that was his venue to get into your life and have impact there. But from a closing technique,
It's the same thing.
Okay. Well, that's what I'm wondering, because that was one of the ones I was told as a kid. I remember sitting in front of, grown men, and I'd give my sales pitch on whatever and give the offer and shut up.
Yeah.
It's excruciating, and yet
brutal.
But yeah. And so you're talking about, this isn't sales. You're just talking about humanity. The pause at the end of what? Not a sales pitch necessarily, but from your standpoint, something they've shared that allows them to, or That allows them it.
Yeah. So the
Yeah.
the pause is a gateway to vulnerability and spontaneity and
Okay.
serendipity, right? Because it unlocks a deeper truth, right? And it unlocks something that was not prepared.
Hmm.
And it's that stuff in life, um, that leads to the best friendships, the best adventures, the best experiences, and the best conversations. And in sales, it's that is the space that also it deepens, it creates the same thing. It deepens the conversation to a level where people are getting real.
Hmm.
And what do we know about sales, right? Why do so many people focus on rapport building? Because trust is everything, right? Trust comes from vulnerability and a series of deepening disclosures. And that emerges very often when you create the space for it to emerge, and not before. So it's one of the things that, when you talk about the corollary with sales and also just having good conversations, it's kind of the same stuff, when it comes down to it. I mean, if you're a functional medicine, like practitioner, and you want to have a conversation with a patient or a client that leaves them deeply moved and willing to actually make the changes in their life that will move the needle and make them well again. That is a sales conversation,
Hmm.
but it's also just a human conversation. And when you zoom the lens out, like none of this happens until and unless you create safety,
Hmm.
you know, and that, I mean, I've learned that in the context of individual conversations. I've learned it in context of so many programs that we have run over the years. I've learned it in the context of your annual adult summer camp, where we now have 425 people living communally for 3.5 days. And one of the things we learned really fast is that if we don't figure out how to create safety, nothing else matters. If we do figure out how to create safety, it almost doesn't, everything that needs to unfold from that moment forward unfolds because people feel okay dropping the facade. They feel okay getting real. They feel okay being vulnerable and disclosing who they really are, what matters to them, what they care about. And once that happens, like everything changes.
Well, obviously, again, and not to just tout numbers, but I'm looking at the success of your show. I read some of your testimonials and I saw testimony to what you've just said that didn't resonate as much till now as you discussed it of creating safety. I will raise my hand and admit that as a podcast host, with a show with great numbers and good ranking and great, the best of the best interviewees, I've never thought I need to create safety in my show. And yet what you say resonates because it is relationship. And in that I know it, but I didn't bring it here. So if we were to all bring that into not only our personal relationships, but our work relationships, and even to the aspect of being a presenter, can I be on stage? Have you thought about this as you're on, same thing, as you're on stage in front of live humans, that you are there to create safety so that, I'll let you fill that in, so that they,
So that I can take people from a place at their beginning, through a journey and deliver them into a different state or place. So in
wow.
a very past life, I've been in the fitness industry in a number of different ways too.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, I owned a health club. At one point, I owned a large yoga center in New York City for 7 years, and I taught. So I was on the floor teaching thousands of students, and I've trained hundreds of teachers. And in New York City, if somebody comes to you after a really hard day and they're giving you 90 minutes of their day, that is a huge responsibility. And
Mm-hmm.
then if you pack people mat to mat into a room, you multiply that 90 by a lot of people, that's a big responsibility, right? So I realized that pretty early on. And my goal was, I said, everybody's landing here kind of frazzled, kind of burned out. They all need something a little bit different, but there's some sort of like universal things that they all need. And I knew that my job was to take them from the state that they came to me in and take them through some sort of collective journey that would leave them in a different state, that would leave them in some way changed. And what I learned really quickly was that I needed to create safety to do that and for them to let go, to be present, to not be thinking about like themselves and whether they could do a pose or how they look doing this or being like being judgmental about themselves. I needed them to just let go and know that they were completely safe and it was okay to just, if you needed to be like curled up in fetal position, weeping for 90 minutes, that's okay. If you want to fully express the most, outrageous, physical manifestation of a pose, that's okay too. And everything in between. Um, and what's interesting too is, and this is actually just kind of coming to me as we're talking. I have been in businesses that have very often had 50 to 80% female clientele.
Hmm.
That is true of Good Life Project as well. Whether it's entrepreneurial trainings, whether it's big retreats, whether it's the camp that we do, whether it's our audience on the podcast. I also made a commitment when we started Good Life Project from the very first day to always feature a minimum of 50% of our guests would always be women. Um, and a big part of that is because you just should be doing that. But another part of it is also I'm a father to a daughter. And I realized very quickly that when I started looking across the media, very often mainstream media, stories being told of great women doing great work in the world, strong women, there weren't many stories being told. And relative to the stories of men, it had nothing to do with the fact that there aren't these women in the world. My God, there are zillions of them. They're incredible. It's just nobody was telling the story on the level I felt it should be told. So I felt like I had to be part of the solution. I think because of that, and what I learned in that was very quickly in the early days of the podcast, it was actually very hard for us to inspire women to say yes to be guests on the podcast.
Hmm.
It wasn't that I couldn't find them. Like I said, there are millions of amazing stories. But while I was being pitched maniacally by men nonstop, and I was being pitched maniacally by very often publicists who were representing pitching on 89% men, um, I was really struggling to bring women onto the show. And so I started asking some of my friends who were women and very often who were powerful women in business and in life. And one of the things that they said to me was that, which I didn't get, and I was blind to this, and I'm so glad that it was revealed to me years ago, was that the the exposure, the risk of sort of like ways that you can be attacked and exposure is very different between men and women. Very often, a man is going to be attacked for his ideas. A woman could be attacked, especially on social media and newer media forms, for any number of things. And it's absurd, it's unfair. But because of that, this is just I'm relaying what's been told to me. The that women may be much more cautious, thoughtful, deliberate, and intentional about who they say yes to, understanding the environment that they'll be in. And part of that is understanding and believing that there's safety, which I think my experience has been that men tend to care less. So I think I had to understand that dynamic much earlier on and really learn how to cultivate
Hmm.
that in a meaningful way. And I'm actually really thankful that I was kind of because I was blind to a lot of all this, and and I think it's also opened me to just a lot of the dynamic that goes on around men and women, especially in business, and a lot of the inequity.
Yeah, when you say that safety in regards to us, and I thought of myself as I'm interviewing somebody or I'm being interviewed, if it seems a little, there's a thought that it would be, I hadn't thought about it in that terms, but a little challenging is what I would have thought of for some reason. It's almost a little adrenaline that comes up. Like that's gonna be fun. Let's do that. Not safety. So Jonathan, I'm wondering as you've gone along in your story as an entrepreneur, and with ups and downs. I read about the yoga place and the struggles there, and that, and now into an author and a podcaster, but which is a term for speaker, presenter, to me, an influencer. When did you realize this? Was it a gradual understanding? Was there an epiphany point where it kind of hit you? Because at some point you were back here. You were an older version of Jonathan, and not the guy who hosts this massive podcast and has a best selling book and all that. Where along these lines of doing life and doing business and trying to progress in your own world did you realize this thing that is now a primary, not even a platform, it's the vehicle, it's a methodology that you utilize in all that you're doing? When did that come about?
Yeah, I think it's honestly an evolutionary process for me. If I look back, it's been a part of the businesses that I built for decades. They've always been community driven businesses in
Mm-hmm.
some way, shape, or form. I've always been deeply fascinated by social dynamics and collective social dynamics. I was a club DJ when I was in college, and I had my own company. And then I was also, like out spinning in clubs. And I learned very early on that you could have hundreds of people on a dance floor till 4 in the morning. And as the DJ, I had a tremendous amount of control over like the energy and the social dynamic of this entire wave of humanity on the dance floor for an extended window of time. I could create a moment of collective elevation. I could create a moment of deep calm and ease. And I could take a group from being frenetic and ecstatic and completely in the moment and beyond self-awareness to splitting into partners and being very calm and mellow and deeply other, like oriented. And I think I've been fascinated by that dynamic for years. So when I move into business, I'm like, how can I understand the deep behavior of social dynamics in order to create moments and experiences and solutions that are fun for me and at the same time in some way leave people changed? That has morphed into brick and mortar businesses in the yoga world, in the fitness world, and now more recently, in the virtual world.
Uh-huh.
But it's all sort of like this evolutionary thing. And the idea of creating a safe container and building community, I think I've keyed in on the more granular elements of what make it work, probably over the last just 3 or 4 years. But I've been probably less intentionally aware of it and playing with it and sort of massaging it and running experiments around all of this for decades.
Okay, I just like, as I'm writing notes, deep behavior of social dynamics in the same line with DJ in a club. That's meaningful. So as people are listening to this, as I'm listening to this, Jonathan, as a student of your own progress as well, and I want to tell you, we had a Ziegler meeting this morning about the podcast, and I told them I've been listening to your stuff and looking at it, really intrigued with what you're doing, and desiring to emulate some of it. I love the spirit of it. As people are listening to this, myself included, and we hear that, where do we go? Where would you lead people for resources on that, on becoming the type of person who is aware of the deep behavioral of social dynamics, that realizes that they can lift a group, that they can deepen a group, that they can do that with an individual, but also with a group? As again, we have a majority of folks here who are they are leading or influencing, or they are deciding to do that. They want to become that, and they're here with a desire, and yet they need leading. They need some resources.
Yeah, that's actually a tough one. So I have found a lot of ideas in this is going to sound weird, the intersection between social psychology and nonviolent revolution theory.
Okay. Nonviolent revolution theory. Okay. Keep going.
So, yeah, like one of the classic books in understanding influence is Robert Cialdini's. The name of the book is Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion. Every marketer, every copywriter on the planet can probably cite you like page and verse from that book because it deconstructs the process of human influence. But what it really is, it's just understanding the psyche of action taking, right? And it's more, tailored towards individuals, but it is such a core. It's something like 33, 34 years old at this point. It is as relevant today as it ever was because it speaks to the human condition, and the human condition fundamentally doesn't change. Who we are is who we are. The circumstance of humanity changes, but the essence of who we are, it's largely, it is what it is. so that's, like a starting point, I think, for a lot of people. Cialdini's written a number of books since then also, which are interesting. And because he's research based, there's some really interesting science around it as well, rather than it being sort of like pure marketing. Um, there's on the nonviolent revolution theory side of things, there's God, I'm completely blanking on his name now. Literally a pamphlet called "From Dictatorship to Democracy," that was written. It'll come to me. I can't believe I'm spacing on his name. Somebody who has studied his work deeply, somebody who's researched movements and revolutions for decades and decades, decades, and created this relatively short booklet that has become the handbook for nearly every revolution in across the globe for decades now.
Gene
Uh,
Sharp?
yeah, Gene Sharp. Thank you.
I just looked it up while you're talking. I'm searching. So, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so a chunk of years ago, I actually started to pull from the psychology of influence. I'm a writer, so I'm deeply fascinated with language and how language works. And I love music. I love sort of more tribal, energetic things. And so I started to pull together all these disparate worlds to create a framework for to apply them all. My question was, can you essentially apply all these theories to create a movement like growth, but in a business context, or will it just bastardize everything? And the answer is you can do it, but you have to be really careful how you do it, or else you'll be perceived as being opportunistic. And
Mm.
in fact, you may well be being opportunistic. So what's interesting is I created a manifesto around that, which I'm happy to share with you if you want to. I'll give you. It's nowhere right now, but if you want, it's just a PDF, and I'll give you a copy if you want to share it with anyone. And we built trainings and courses around it, and I was leading that for a while, but we shut it all down because it was never supposed to be for anybody else. It wasn't my main thing, and it was becoming a distraction. But more recently, maybe because of what's happening in the world these days, I've been getting calls to sort of share more on that. So I may end up writing a bunch around it. But those Cialdini's got really powerful work around this. If you go back in time, you look at some of the work of Emil Durkheim on collective effervescence. That he's somebody who expands these ideas out into like large crowd dynamics. I think it's really fascinating work. Also, this is kind of esoteric reading,
Hmm.
so you have to be a bit of a geek to get into it. But there's some fascinating stuff around there too.
Well, I am fascinated. I do want that manifesto, and because again, in this realm, I have always been enamored with, burdened with people who have life altering, changing, beautiful, anointed messages that unfortunately can be, the book is judged by its cover and not go anywhere. And that burdens me. And so lately, I know with a new business endeavor I have, it's only as good as can we get people to engage. And to me, behavioral economics is the term. And I recently read again the book Nudge, which I feel is Business 101. And there's a new one. I've got it here on my desk, The Undoing Project by Michael
Oh yeah,
Lewis. Okay, well,
yeah.
my
It's about
partner,
Kahneman and Tversky.
well,
Yeah.
so my partner just said, "Yeah, you got to read that. You got to read that because if we can't get people to engage, which again comes back to you and this Good Life project, and to me, is somewhat of a phenomenon to see what you're doing, how you're doing, and the fact that people are engaging at such a high level. So it's a beautiful thing. I do want to ask you in the time we have about you and your own good life. So you today, what is this, January? I probably shouldn't date a podcast, but beginning of the year, in some year, it is, as we sit here you are, the New Year's rolled around in your good life, your family, your staff, the folks that you're working with. What is something that right now in the ingredients in the buckets is just you feel like this one's overflowing right now?
um, Contribution
Mm.
is overflowing to a point where it may actually be overflowing too fast.
Okay,
um,
tell me more.
and some people would be like, "Oh, does that mean you're making a ton of money?" No, um, we do fine. But what I mean by that is it's at the end of last year, we've made some really substantial changes in business and in focus. And the truth is, I'm a big fan of not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. And I realized that I had actually hit a point of pretty extreme burnout. And I was like, you know what? This can't continue. My contribution bucket, I'm doing all these things that are being very much of service and it's nourishing on a lot of levels, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that is really a deeper part of who I am that I'm not doing. I am fundamentally at heart, I'm a maker and a geek. And I love to deconstruct stuff and then share it in a way that changes people. And I wasn't doing that enough. I was very outward focused and very service focused. I'm also on the introverted side of the social spectrum. So we've made a bunch of shifts in business now where I am now sort of like very much in my cave and developing. I mean, we've got a new website that's like almost rolling out. We're rolling out a second podcast. We are
Mm,
rolling out. I've been developing a whole new set of intellectual property around contributing to the world, actually, and how to find and do um, work that's deeply meaningful, whether that's the thing you get paid for or not, in a practical way. That what I referenced in the beginning of our conversation, kind of coming full circle, that state of being sparked, which is the overlap of being on purpose, deep in flow, and fully expressed. How do you get that?
mm,
And so I'm doing a lot of work around this and it's all starting to bear fruit and it's all gonna this is sort of like a big thing that will roll out over the course of this year along with the new podcast and other stuff. So that bucket right now is a huge part of my focus and it's filling really fast. My biggest challenge, if anything, is having circuit breakers to bring me back and say, hey, listen, make sure you still take care of your physical health. My my optimal mode of contribution is to be a serial creator and not a parallel creator. And for me, that means I'm most fully expressed when I'm doing fewer things better.
mm,
Right now, I'm doing more things worse. Here's the classic entrepreneurial challenge, though, is that when you're in the early stage of a series of endeavors, any one of which you would love to see move forward and really take off, you don't have enough data points to know which is the one that will actually have legs or the
mm,
one or two. So you necessarily have to be in a more things worse mode and be hyper alert of the data as it's coming in so that as soon as you can possibly do it, you call the things that you know don't have the level of opportunity that the other ones do and as rapidly as you can, you get back to the point of being able to do fewer things better. So I'm sort of in that middle ground right now, and really looking forward because I'm starting to see some of the things. So it's kind of this really interesting, fertile place that I'm in right now.
okay, so in that, my next question was, where's the challenge within your buckets? What is the thing that is threatening the balance of the buckets? Now, in regards to contribution, you just talked about some circuit breakers and some self-care. I don't know if that relates to the overall question of when we look at your buckets on one that's flowing over, where is the one that you're having to give affirmative action to because
Yeah,
it's the weak link?
health.
Okay.
Vitality, no doubt is vitality. So my mindset practices are really strong. I have daily meditation practices and stuff like that. The my movement is where it takes a knock. So getting my body moving, committing to exercising, mobilizing my workflow.
Yeah.
So like right now I'm on a headset. Um, and right now I'm sitting because we have video on. If
Oh,
but for the fact that we have video, if I was recording a podcast or if I was on a business call with anybody else, I would actually have one of 4 different types of headsets that I have depending on how I'm communicating, and I would be walking the entire time. If it was
mhm.
warm enough, I'd be outside. Today it's kinda cold, so I would be inside. So I'm constantly trying to think of ways to mobilize my workflow, and then to go beyond that and make sure that I'm actually moving my body more intensely and going out and exercising. That's the thing that tends to, take a hit for me, and that's the thing where I need to be most proactive at, at making sure that I have circuit breakers set up to tell me when that bucket is starting to run a little too low.
That's well. We need to get together and hang out because my health coach on the other side of the wall here. We met this morning on some goals that I'm working on and some things I'm not as happy with. And she said I am working out too much, too intensely, and my cortisol levels are too high. And she said, Kevin, go meditate. You know this. You got to instill it in the not just once because I do it in the morning. But she says no, before you eat during the day. Man, that's the hardest one for me to do.
Yeah,
So
that was really hard for me for a long time also.
wow.
But I've been doing it pretty much daily since 2010 now, and it's been completely game changing on every level.
Okay, well, God repeating himself to me today. Thank you. With the people that you contact, like I said, I went on your iTunes reviews and was reading some testimonials, and they're such a gift. And with the people that you're in contact with, and I'm sure you are contacted daily, multiple times with people who are listening to you, they're reading your stuff, they're listening to your interviewees, and they're impacted. What's a testimonial that has resonated with you, that has been meaningful to you, of somebody who's embraced this methodology and has received a gift in their life?
Yeah, it's a great question. And probably the ones that are most meaningful are not the ones that are public, they're the ones that are emailed to me,
Yeah.
which also makes them hard for me to share because they're emailed in confidence. But the general, I've had a number where people have been in a dark place, and in some way they've intersected with the project. And whether it was my voice, whether it was, very often it's not me, it's an idea that was shared by a guest, it's something that was written. Um, that in some way it has just sparked a little bit of lightness in their life and allowed them to see possibility again, where all they saw was darkness and no hope of anything ever being different. And
Yeah.
in that flicker of possibility came the smallest little action, which started to compound on a daily basis and bring them out of darkness. And that those are the stories and the emails that you're kind of like, huh, and people will often say, they're like, um, I just want you to know what you're doing in the world matters. Um, and that's pretty cool.
What you're doing in the world matters. That's why we're talking to you now. I could talk to you all day. Thank you for giving us some of your precious time away from your own project for ours. And it's a gift to people. I'm honored to bring them the Good Life Project and you, Jonathan Fields. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Friends, thanks for joining me on this drive. That again is Jonathan Fields. And wherever you're listening to this, you can find him if you'll just type in The Good Life Project or Jonathan Fields, and you'll find him. He is, it's a really popular show, often at the top of the charts in self-improvement. Got a question or comment for myself or for Jonathan? Let me know. Just go to kevinmiller.co and we can connect there. Until next time, I hope this episode helps you drive further and most of all, enjoy the ride.
Yeah.